Hello, companions, and for those of you who did not make it to CompanionFest to be part of the Encanto discussion, this is the makeup information content, kind of get you caught up, get you thinking about some of the things that we talked about in response to that movie, as well as setting up the solitude work on Family Constellations. I think there's a really great connection between the Encanto movies, the movie, and the reflection work that we did in terms of families in systems and for you as an individual and an energy in your family, discovering what those family patterns are, who the labels are given to, and really being aware and mindful of those kinds of dynamics. So most of the questions that we talked about in the discussion are in Canvas. They're all listed out there as far as who do you identify with and talking about extended families and your experience as a member of a family and what that's like. This part, I just wanted to talk about what I explained in that session about what I had seen in the documentaries from the creators of Encanto, where they were talking about Colombia and Colombian traditions and heritage, and the Latinx families, extended families that are really large, what it's like to be part of those and to belong and not belong and all those kinds of things. And that all becomes really relevant. But what I'm going to do here in the video is just kind of go generationally through what each character stands for, recognizing that their role within the family system has both a strength and a gift that's really positive, and it also has a shadow side. As you might imagine, most things do, right? Whatever the strength is, there's also some darkness lurking underneath there. So if we start at the top, generationally, we have Abuela up there, who's the matriarch and the one who sort of controls what goes on in the family, how the family presents itself to the community. She is the diplomat that is the liaison between the community and the family, sort of the head PR person, if you will, but also very tyrannical in her way of controlling who is what and who plays what role and how they matter or not to the family. Now, her husband is also a character, even though he's already deceased. He's also, Pietro is also a character in the story, but what's different about him and somebody like Bruno is that Pietro is very much a part of the family still. His portrait hangs in the stairwell and she still talks to him. They still recognize what he did and his life. And so he, even though he's not technically alive at this point, he's very much part of the family system in terms of sort of ruling things with her from the background. And we'll talk about this when we get to Bruno and Mirabel and the way that they don't feel included in the family and how that exclusion creates a disruption in the family system that really can't be healed until they're brought back in. But I get ahead of myself. So you've got Abuela up here as the matriarch who is controlling things. The next generation down, you have Peppa, and she's the one who controls the weather. And if you think about her as an instigator, the one who, you know, emotionally can change the mood of the room or change the mood of the group. So the great thing about that can be on the positive side of it. The negative part for her is that she doesn't really get to feel how she feels. You know, she does this a lot where she's grabbing her hair. She's very stressed. Like, I always have to smile. I gotta be happy all the time. I can't be sad or angry. I have to be happy, 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 happy. That really takes a toll on you as a person when you have to take on that role of always being happy. She's married to Felix, who's kind of the life of the party kind of guy. He's the one who's like dance and laughter and passion and all those kinds of things. He's also her symbiotic need. He both encourages her to be calmer, which like that can have positive and negative traits, right? He's either an enabler or he's a supporter, depending on how you look at that. And the thing about him too is he's also really not allowed to be upset or negative. Like, he's always got to be putting the bright spin on everything, making it fun, keeping it light, you know, doing what the people need. Julieta, Mirabel's mother, is the family cook, and so she recognizes the tradition that Abuela wants to keep a hold of, but she's also validating the younger generation in Mirabel, standing up for her, and all of that sort of thing. And this idea of healing and nurturing through food, which is a big deal in the Latinx community, but in terms of our family systems, that nurturing person who is giving all the time, we don't really know a whole lot about her as far as who she is, other than that she just loves everybody else. And so her husband is the one who always needs he's kind of the goofy dad character who always needs the healing and needs the nurturing and needs the love. And then of course you've got Bruno, who is the one that no one talks about. And there's kind of the joke about, you know, being the person that the family doesn't want to talk about, or they don't want to invite to Thanksgiving crazy Uncle so-and-so or whatever. But in the family systems world, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, that really matters. Like that kind of exclusion disrupts the family in a really significant way. And so the thing about him too is that other characters have songs where they sing about how they feel about their role or their self in the family. Bruno doesn't get to use his own voice. Everyone else talks about him. He doesn't get to tell his own story. And so that's a part of being the outcast person. You don't get to tell people who you are. They learn who you are by other people's accounts of you, which are not always accurate, as we saw in there. So the next level down, we've got Dolores, and she's the one who can hear everything. She's kind of portrayed a little bit as a gossip, but a little bit also as a communicator, the one who knows what's going on with everybody. The shadow side for her is that she's supposed to listen to everybody else, but nobody ever listens to her. And so she's not heard, she's kind of invisible. And then you've got her brother who can shapeshift and turn into other people. And it's kind of like, we don't really want you for you. We want you for who you can be. You can be like so-and-so, or you can be like so-and-so. And he's also kind of the, I got to keep everybody laughing, be funny, the kind of the clown kind of guy. But he never gets to be himself, really. His gift of being other people is like, he's not enough. He's got to be somebody else. And then Antonio, of course, has this connection to nature and the animals, and the creators of Encanto talked about him in a very specific way, that they wanted to create a young male hero who wasn't like Superman, but somebody who was connected to the rainforest and to that force and vitality of life and nature, and how great it could be to be that guy instead of having to be, you know, Captain America or whatever, that kind of hero. And so that's what he's all about. Then in Mirabel's family, you've got Isabel, who's kind of the poster child. She's got to be perfect all the time. And on the one hand, like, she makes it look effortless. It's really easy for her to be perfect. But underneath that is like, you don't know how much energy it takes for her to keep that facade up, like how hard it is to be perfect all the time. And so her character, recognizing that that kind of perfection isn't really what she wants, who she is, she's doing it for what she thinks everyone else needs from her, which is this perfect kind of ideal kid. And then Luisa, the strong one, in some kind of a similar way, she's stronger than anybody else in the village, but she doesn't use her strength for herself. She's a people pleaser, and she's always doing what other people want of her, and she's at their beck and call. And you can hear that in her song too, right? Shouldering the family burdens and like holding everything together. And how do you be the person who bears all that by yourself? It's very, very weighty. And Mirabel, of course, is 14, kind of coming of age story for her, but you know, she's quirky and she's got her flaws and she's trying really hard to still fit in, although she can't be in the photograph, right? The family photo has everyone but her, and trying to pretend that that doesn't bother her, like that this idea that she isn't good enough doesn't bother her, and that she's okay, even though, you know, she's not, and she has to admit that she's not okay, and that this is not okay. And her outburst even at Abuela at the end, like, we'll never be good enough for you, is really significant in terms of recognizing the dynamic for what it is, and not like judging it in one way or another, but just saying this is what's going on. And so then we talked about at the end of the movie, like, what is her gift after all? Like, Mirabel goes through the whole movie as being the only one who has no gift, and at the end when she turns the doorknob to the house and it lights up, like, what is that gift? So I'm not going to tell you the answer to that question. That's one of the ones that we had for discussion, so think about that for yourself. What do you think her gift is? And then the conversation that they have at the river at the end, of course, thinking about the Abuela character actually coming to a place where she could recognize the energy she's bringing into the family and apologize for it and change. That's just not realistic. I mean, Disney needs to tie a nice bow on the story, but not particularly realistic. And so when we do this work in family systems, it is not our goal to make everything tied up with a nice bow and everybody's happy at the end. Like, that's not the point. The point is to recognize and be aware of what's going on so that you are, like everything else in our spiritual journey, right? We're trying to be aware of the gifts and aware of the shadows, and in ways that will open us up to choice and freedom rather than acting out of patterns and habits. Which leads me into our conversation about family systems and family constellations. And I've got the PDF of the two, and there are two of them, and they're pretty lengthy, so make sure you spend a good bit of time with them. The PDF of the two exercises for you to think through and to work through. The first one is specifically a family tree kind of exercise where you're listing out the people in your family that you know and what you know about them. So you're looking for patterns. You're looking for strings of common themes about how they spent money, how they felt about moving or staying in place, how they felt about relationships, how they felt about addictions or death or war or grief or whatever the things are in your family that ripple through the generations. What are those things and what do they have in common? Also looking for like dates or numbers that pop up a lot. I know when I did it, there are a lot of divorced people in my family with children, and when I looked at it, all of us got divorced when our children were about 5 or 7. Like everybody's kids were like whatever number it was, it had a 5 in it and a 7 in it, whether they were 5 and 7 or 15 and 17. I thought that is so weird. And then I found out something really significant happened in March on 2 birthdays, March 5th and March 7th. And those 2 dates really defined in a lot of ways the other energies in the family. And I know I'm not giving you any details, so it's really vague, but the point is that those numbers became really significant for me as I was looking for patterns in terms of, wow, these numbers are showing up a lot. What's connected here, and what am I observing? So that's the first part of it. The first one is really just, what do you notice? There's a little bit of what do you do about it, but it's a lot of what do you notice. The second one is a little bit heavier into the, let's look for ways of finding these patterns that rely on what's stopping me from moving forward in my life. So let's say that I have a situation where there's something I'm trying to do and it's not working, and there's this, sort of narrative that's playing in my head. The question is that my narrative, or is it the pattern, or is it an aspect that belongs to somebody else? Somebody maybe who's deceased from a prior generation. And in family systems, the system wants to bring itself into balance. So every new birth is an opportunity for unresolved junk from the past to get resolved. And so to be able to look at what am I carrying and what language am I using, that's a good indicator to know what I'm carrying. What language am I using that indicates to me whether these things actually do belong to me or whether they belong to a larger piece of the system, whether it's another person or whether it's just a pattern in the family, because that's different, right? If it's something that I have, and it might be easy to just dismiss it as like, oh, that's just part of my life. That's something I learned in this area. It's like, well, but what if you learned it, but so did your parents, and so did your grandparents, and so did their parents? Like, starting to ask, where is the origin of this? And the book I got this from actually is called It Didn't Start With Me. And so looking at where did it start? He tells a story about a young man who was really successful. He was doing great in school. He was an athlete. He had everything going for him. When he turned 19, all of a sudden he was waking up in the middle of the night, afraid to go back to sleep, really cold. Couldn't figure out what was going on, saw a therapist, got medication, nothing was working. He went to a Family Constellations therapist and discovered that in his family tree, there was this person nobody ever talked about who worked on the power lines. And one winter there was a blizzard and the guy froze to death, and he was 19. So at the same age that this guy turned the age that his uncle was, he started waking up freezing to death and afraid to be unconscious. And so if you think about that energy of a man who is dying of cold, not afraid to let go, and a man who wakes up in the middle of the night afraid to go back to sleep and feels cold, like, it's hard to ignore that kind of energy. That's pretty drastic. There are more examples in the book about people, Holocaust survivors, but also their children and their grandchildren carrying some of the same fears and traumas as their grandparents did. And so trying to find out what is yours to carry and what is not yours to carry. Because then there are rituals and exercises that you can do where you recognize those things, you recognize those people from your past, and then you give it back to them. You say, I will honor you. I will, acknowledge your presence in my family system, but this is not my energy to carry. It's yours. I'm giving it back to you. And then you can yourself be free of that energy. That is the hope. And I do think that there's a lot of power in these kinds of exercises in terms of moving toward freedom, which is what we want to do, right, in the spiritual journey. And so I offer you those 2 reflections. I hope that they're really helpful and insightful. And if you want at any point to talk about any of this, please contact me and we'll set something up. All right. Thanks.